I don't like to look back, but for about 3 years when I worked, all I had were just a few tools that my father-in-law left that I never got to meet him, unfortunately. But I didn't buy anything unless I could pay for it. And I still do that. If I need a tool, I don't even think about it until I have the money to pay for it. I don't like to go into debt. And it's the same way with my lumber pile. I've never bought wood unless I could pay for it before or after it was delivered. And one of the worst things that you can do starting out is get into debt unless you have a real rich father-in-law. And I didn't have a father-in-law, but he couldn't have helped me anyway. But I just say that because you can get into an awful lot of financial trouble by buying equipment that you don't know how to pay for and all. But I said yesterday, I guess I know why they do it, but like I said, I got a beautiful Minimax that is a beautiful machine, and it was at the door, and I didn't know who the heck. I said, David, did you order this thing? Because David's always buying things he shouldn't buy. No, I didn't buy it, Sam. And but I have a lot of equipment that manufacturers have given me, and I guess they figure I'll talk about them, but I don't. Well, I did mention Minimax, didn't I? No. But you become very good friends with the old tools that you have, and you're used to them and all. A lot of these new things, I don't even know how to turn them on even. But David, who works with me, is a machine nut, and he knows about everything. And so if I get into machinery trouble, I ask David he repairs things for me. He does everything for me. Let's see if this is going to work. I think it will. 'No, I'm afraid I'll break it here. And this pulls out and holds the table up. And then at the bottom, looking at it at the bottom, I have just cut all the way through with a little ebony pull, and you pull this out, and this comes out and holds the tabletop. It's quite clever. It works out real nice and all. But I make these all different sizes. I've made them as big as a 12-foot long, just on a single pedestal and all. They work out real nice. When I first started, my wife had a faith that very few people had, and I think it was her faith in God that kept us going, and I think that's what keeps me going. And when I took 21 stitches in right across the knuckles, and that wasn't long ago, somebody my age probably wouldn't have healed, but within 2 weeks, I didn't let it bother me. They were all bandaged up, and I looked like a basket case, but I worked even with stitches, and I had 21 stitches across my knuckles, and the doctor couldn't believe that I had hit a bone. I healed very fast, and I had the stitches out in 2 weeks, and they all worked good, except for the ones that I've cut off. You see here, I've cut those, and that was on the joiner, and stupid, but I think the joiner is one of the most dangerous tools in the shop. But the boys don't work for me. Do not use a shaper. I do all the shaping myself on the shaper, and that's a very dangerous machine. And They never even asked me if they could do it. But, well, I think the most dangerous tool in the shop is a dull tool. I really do. And I keep all my tools very sharp. And I have somebody that comes in once a week and picks them up and sharpens everything for me. And I do have my favorite tools that I like the fellows that work with me. I bought them each a set of very good chisels, and they have everything that I have. And the safety issue is one of the things that worries me the very most. But what I do, the three fellows that have worked with me have been with me about 75 years combined. But I have full insurance for them and their families, and that is one of the things that I felt that I had to do. Because you get hurt very easily in a shop that way, and accidents happen so quickly. You wonder, well, how did that happen? And most of them are stupid accidents, really. But safety is a big issue, and I really worry more about the fellows that work with me getting hurt than I worry about myself. But I have a very good shop, and we keep it nice and clean and all, and you don't stumble over things. But a lot of times, my shop right now has about 60 pieces I'm working on, and I jump from one thing to another. And this pile here belongs to Mrs. So-and-so, and this belongs to Mr. So-and-so. And a friend of mine came by that I've done a lot of work for one day, and he said, "Sam, I've been waiting a heck of a long time for my furniture." And I said, "I've started it. That bunch over there is yours." And he said, "Sam, I was here a year ago and you had that bunch there. I'll bet you tell that to everybody that comes in, that is your furniture." And damn it was true. But I do jump from one thing to another. I have about 60 pieces that I am working on now, and I'll do all the chair seat or back legs on the shaper and all, and I have them all piled up. There'll be maybe 5 different kinds of backs, and then I have a pile of seats that are different sizes for different things that I make, and I knew who they're for. And then eventually I go in and we start putting them together. I don't take down payments. I don't like down payments because then I'm obligated to get the stuff up. Well, I paid you, 50% down. Where's my furniture? So I'd rather not take down payments and all. But some people insist on paying it up front, but they don't get it any faster. And I don't like to be paid up front because then when it's finished, I don't get anything. So some of you have had those kind of things happen to you, but I've been fortunate. I'm doing what I love to do, and Beverly is behind me 100%, and so is Roz. Roz is really the boss of the whole thing.
Sam, I know that this is probably sacrilege at this point as you're making one of these solid seats, but when you do upholstered seats, what kind of a clearance do you allow between the edge of the rabbet and the seat bottom?
Well, I'll do a drawing, but answering your question, I'll show you how I do it. But I leave a clearance. It depends on the fabric, first of all.
Right.
And just about all the fabric I use is Jack Leonard Larson. I came here from Washington, D.C., where he was just awarded the first honor that the Textile Museum has ever given to a weaver, and Jack received it. And I've used his fabrics for 50 years. Sometimes they're very thick, heavy fabrics. Other times they may be thigh box silk. And I used thigh box silk once, and the coarse silk is unbelievable. You'd think that it would wear out, but it wears better than anything, really. And it depends on the fabric I'm using. And on leather, I know pretty much. I leave about 16-inch clearance for leather and all. And but I never have any space. I mean, they tuck in very nicely. We don't have to hammer them in. They fit in very nicely. They come off very nicely. That's the seat. And what I do in here, I have a corner here, a corner here, a corner here, a corner here. And what I'll do, and this is all curved, so the first piece I make will be shaped like this. That fits in here. And this is straight here. I shouldn't have done that. This is straight, and this is straight. And then this goes like that. And then it goes like so. Then this piece does this. I dowel here, I dowel there, I dowel there, and I dowel there. Now that fits into a seat that is like this. This frame sits right in here, like so. Can you see that from where you are? And I fit it very carefully. I leave a 1/16 of an inch clearance between this and this right here. And then I round this off at the top. This border's like this. I round it off so it won't cut the fabric or whatever. And then we take rubber strips about 3 inches wide, and we put them in here like this. Then we weave it through this way, like so. And that gives you the nice soft seat. Then we put muslin over, cover the whole thing with muslin. And then we take the seat, the foam rubber, and it'll be shaped like that. And we put that over the whole thing, like so. And then we cover that with muslin, pull it over, and then we put our fabric on, and we pull that over, nail it under the bottom. The corners are cut like this so that we can roll that back. I used to do it myself, and then I found out that I found out about an upholsterer that does all my work. He's about 80 years old now, can hardly get around. And I don't know what I'm going to do when he dies, but he doesn't do work for anybody else but me, and I pay his license fee of about $1,000 a year to keep him going because he can't afford to do that. And, I let him take all the time he wants. But anyway, that covers over. And then if it's tufted, I like to do a lot of tufting. And say this is it here. And then we draw lines across. And then it's tufted like so, and they're folded over. It's quite beautiful. And all, but when he first started doing it for me, he'd make them all square. I mean, here I have a shape like this, but he insisted on doing it this way. And I had to be very careful because he's very, very good. And I said, no, Dick, let's do it this way. Let's go this way, this way, this way, this way, that way. And I let him believe that he figured it out, so we get along real good. And but he does all my upholstery, and I don't do too much upholstery furniture. But like the other day, one of my clients was my very, very first client. I did 2 day beds for them, and they've had them for 55 years. and they're getting old, and I don't know if they moved or what, but anyway, their son got them, and I'd done furniture for Jeff, and he called me up one day and said, I have something for you, and he gave them back to me. And the upholstering, they'd had them recovered, and it was just absolutely, it was, say, 24 inches at one end and 21 inches at the other end. And I took the cushions to the upholsterer, and he said, Sam, this is crazy as all get out. He said, they're way off, 24 inches at one end and 21 inches at the other. And I said, well, they must have had them recovered then. So we had to take the day beds back to him. And they ought to be finished when I get home. But they're the first pieces I've ever made, and I'm getting them back. So I'm real happy about that. And they look pretty doggone, they look good, huh, Bev? And I'm covering them in a Jacqueline R. Larson fabric, and we'll just use it for sofas and for day beds. But I've never had a piece brought back because of workmanship or it's fallen apart or something. I've had them come back to be reupholstered and all. And then the other day, a very dear friend of mine who was one of the best potters in the country went away, and they had a place in Santa Fe, and he gave a chair like this to his daughter, and it had been in the house in Santa Fe. They only used it a couple of months out of the year, and it would get hot, cold, and all, and the seats started not cracking, but parting, and she sent it back to me, and it just took us a day to redo the thing and sand it and oil. It looks like a brand new chair. She's going to fall over when she gets it. I've just shipped it to her. But very, very seldom do I get furniture back to be repaired or anything. It stands up very, very well. And one of the things that happened one time was I did this beautiful, great big dining table with wooden hinges, and I delivered it, and then that evening the mother called and said, Sammy, how do you take dents out of your tabletops? And I said, what are you talking about, Lola? And she said, well, Duncan was using a table to put some things together, and he put his little vise on that had grooves, and he put it inside of the table, and there's just a line of grooves and indentations. And I go, oh gosh, okay, I'll come over tomorrow and look at it. And I had to put wet cloths on and steamed it and brought it back out again, but you could still see where he did it. And he's a U.S. Senator now, and he's been a U.S. Senator for a long time. He's real right-wing, but I like him. And we talked about it. Yeah, I remember when I was a little kid, Sam, we were making model airplanes, and my mom saw what I did, and she just about had a heart attack, and you repaired it. And I said, yeah, I remember I repaired it, and those dents are still in it, too, and all. But, I get connected with families, and then they're part of my family. And then when they reorder, I don't think I should charge as much as I do, because I think I still get, $100 for a chair and all. But Roz takes care of that. I let Roz take care of it, you see. So I don't have to worry.
Mr. Mullis, I was looking through your book the other night and saw a picture of you and your family during your youth. I think you were 10 years old or so in the picture.
Uh-huh.
And I see a family that's just riddled with faith. A lot of closeness in the siblings and the other family members present. Multiple times since you've been up here over the past 2 days, you said, I thank God for this, or I pray that this fits together. It may be inappropriate, but I was just hoping that you might comment on your faith.
Well, I grew up in a family of 7 sisters, 6 sisters, and I was born. I was the 7th. And it was a Lebanese family, We were Greek Orthodox. And after 6 daughters, I guess I was a celebration. I don't know. But I had 6 sisters that waited on me all the time. And recently, Bill was doing a television. They're doing a 1-hour program for public television. And he went to Kentucky, Lexington, where she lives with her son, who's a doctor. And he said, well, was Sam spoiled with 6 sisters and all? And Sarah said, well, no, he wasn't spoiled. Really, he wasn't a bit spoiled. A lot of times, though, if he didn't like what Mama cooked, he'd go across to Mr. Constantine, who had a Greek restaurant, and he could go to any store in town and charge things, and Mama would pay for it. But no, he wasn't spoiled. But then my sister's husband died, and she and her 6 children came to live with us during the Depression. And my father lost his business, and he was never really, well, I'd say we were middle class, well off. And it was awful hard on my father. But we lived in a farming town, and a farmer had come into town. He couldn't afford to pay anybody to pick tomatoes or anything. And so we'd all go out to the field and pick tomatoes, and if we picked 10 boxes, he'd give us 3 boxes, and then my father would peddle those, and we survived. My mother had 8 of us, 14 of us in one house, and we all worked and helped. And then when I went to work, when I was 18 out of high school, I was making $12 a week as a commercial artist. And that was a lot of money because men in the shop and machinists were only making 12. And I'd give it to my father, and he'd give me $2 for gasoline, which was 10 cents a gallon in those days. But no, we were a very close-knit family. We still are. And I think that my mother's faith, but and Beverly knows how I feel, but I married a girl that was she was just a wonderful person. And I remember I said we were going to get married. I said, Bill, when we get married, I'll start going to church with you. He says, you go Sunday. So I went to this little church where it was it was an Advent Christian church. And I remember when I went in and we sat in the hall with all these old ladies of the American Revolution. And boy, I went through the 3rd degree. Young man, if you don't take care of this young lady the way she should be taken care of, you have me to answer to. And when I got through, I thought I'd gone through World War II and all, but they were all very nice. And if it hadn't been for Frida got me going to church and all, and no, I had a very, very wonderful life. Well, she went away, and then I was alone for about 3 years, and then I met Beverly, who I knew when she was about 24 years old, and Beverly was dumb enough to marry me, and but we've had a good marriage, and but I think family life, church life is very important. I really do, and we all helped one another growing up, and but I must say that I had a couple of sisters that were quite well-to-do, but I never once ever asked them for help when I got started. Never. And what Frida and I did, we did just with work and a lot of faith. And that's what it takes. I think you have to have faith in what you believe, very much so. And that's very important in my life. It is. And I don't know, like last night we went to a real elegant restaurant, and there was a girl leaning against the wall just as you walked in, and she was the most pitiful thing I've ever in my life seen. And I saw her as we were getting ready to park, she was still standing there, and I thought, well, I wonder where she lives, what she does and all. It was just the saddest picture I've ever bought. She was all wrapped in black, and you just saw her face, and I'd already taken money out of my billfold before I got to her because I knew what I was going to do. And she wasn't begging, she wasn't asking, but it was one of God's crippled children. And I gave her some bills. I don't know how much I gave her, but I gave her some bills, and I thought she was going to fall. She looked at me with these very sorrowful eyes and said, "Thank you." Some people think you were stupid. She was, but you asked me how I feel and all, and that's the way I feel. I feel that we should help one another when we can. And that's the reason I do what I do now. I don't have to do this at all, but I love to share what little I know with other people. And I've had people tell me that after reading my book or talking to me or coming to one of my workshops, it changed their whole life.